The morning of June 12th, 1998, started like any other day in the suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge, Massachusetts. Margaret Wilson, a single mother of two, was preparing breakfast for her children before school. Her daughter Emma, 12, was already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, while her son Noah, 8, was still upstairs getting ready. "Noah, hurry up, sweetie. Your cereal is getting soggy," Margaret called up the stairs. When no answer came, she sighed and climbed the steps to check on him. The bathroom door was open, his toothbrush dry. His bedroom was empty, the window slightly ajar, letting in the early summer breeze. "Noah?" Margaret's voice wavered as she searched the rest of the house, her heart beginning to race. After checking every room twice, she ran to the neighbors, then the nearby park. Within hours, the quiet suburban street was filled with police cars, their lights flashing against the houses as officers combed the area. "He was just here?" Margaret kept repeating to the detective who took her statement, her hands trembling. Around a mug of untouched coffee. "I just checked on him last night. He was sleeping. I don't understand." Detective James Miller had seen cases like this before, but something about Noah's disappearance troubled him deeply. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. It was as if the boy had simply vanished into thin air. "We'll find him, Mrs. Wilson," Detective Miller assured her, but even as he spoke, he knew the statistics. With each passing hour, the chances of finding Noah dimmed, days turned into weeks. Margaret barely slept, surviving on coffee and the kindness of neighbors who brought casseroles she couldn't eat. Emma became withdrawn, sleeping with her brother's favorite stuffed dinosaur. The community organized search parties that combed every inch of woodland, every abandoned building in a 20-mile radius. 6 months after Noah's disappearance, the active investigation was scaled back. By the 1-year mark, Detective Miller had been reassigned to other cases, though he still checked in with Margaret regularly. Noah's case file grew thin, gathering dust on a shelf with other unsolved mysteries. Margaret refused to give up. She maintained Noah's room exactly as he had left it, buying birthday and Christmas presents each year, storing them in his closet. She handed out flyers with Noah's picture at shopping malls and posted age progression photos online. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, she held a candlelight vigil in the local park. "Mom," Emma said gently on the 5th anniversary, now a teenager with eyes too old for her years, "you need to consider the possibility that—" "Don't," Margaret cut her off. "Don't say it. He's out there. I know it. A mother knows these things." As years passed, even Margaret's unwavering hope began to flicker. The police suggested closing the case, and Margaret found herself agreeing to a memorial service on what would have been Noah's 18th birthday. Standing before the empty casket, Margaret felt a part of herself being buried alongside the memories of her son. "Goodbye, my sweet boy," she whispered, placing a single white rose on the polished wood. "I hope you found peace, wherever you are." Life moved on, as it inevitably does. Emma went to college, got married and had children. Of her own, Margaret retired from her job as an elementary school teacher. Noah's room, though still preserved, was rarely entered now. The door usually kept closed, like a shrine to a life cut tragically short. But deep inside, in a corner of her heart that she seldom acknowledged even to herself, Margaret still wondered, still hoped. That flickering flame of maternal instinct never fully extinguished, no matter how hard she tried to let go. Chapter 2. Boston in summer was a different city than the one tourists typically captured on postcards. The July heat wave had draped itself over the city like a heavy blanket, forcing locals to seek respite in air-conditioned buildings or beneath the shade of trees in Boston Common. Margaret Wilson, now 67, moved slowly through the crowd at Faneuil Hall Marketplace. Her daughter, Emma had insisted she come visit for a week, hoping to pull her mother out of the quiet melancholy that had defined her later years. 20 years had passed since Noah disappeared, and the anniversary had just come and gone, marked only by a solitary candle in Margaret's window back home. "Mom, look!" Emma pointed toward a small gathering of people near Quincy Market. "Street performers, let's check it out." Margaret nodded, allowing herself to be guided through the crowd. Her mind wandered as it often did these days, memories filtering through the present like sunlight through leaves. Noah would be 28 now. Would he have Emma's laugh? Would his hair have darkened like his father's? These thoughts, once constant companions, still visited occasionally, though the sharp pain had dulled to a persistent ache. The small crowd had gathered around a street artist who was sketching portraits with remarkable speed and accuracy. His hands moved confidently across the paper, capturing not just features, but essence. A young woman sat on a stool before him, her profile emerging on the page in bold, sweeping lines. "Would you like one, Mom?" Emma asked, her hand on Margaret's shoulder. "It might be a nice souvenir." Before Margaret could answer, the artist finished the current portrait with a flourish. The young woman squealed with delight, handing over some bills before moving away, with her likeness tucked carefully in her bag. "Who's next?" the artist called out, his voice pleasant but tired, worn smooth like a river stone. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and intense blue eyes that studied the crowd. A small scar bisected his right eyebrow. Emma raised her hand. "My mother would love a portrait." Margaret started to protest, but Emma was already leading her forward. Reluctantly, she settled onto the stool, feeling oddly self-conscious as the young man studied her face. "Look straight ahead, please," he instructed gently, his pencil already moving. "This will take about 15 minutes. Margaret sat still, watching the artist work. There was something oddly familiar about him that she couldn't quite place. The way he tilted his head while concentrating, perhaps, or the slight furrow between his brows. She dismissed the thought as the wishful thinking of an old woman who saw ghosts of her son in every young man of a certain age. "Where are you visiting?" "And from?" the artist asked conversationally as he worked. "Oak Ridge, Massachusetts," Margaret replied. "Small town, about an hour west of here." The artist's hand paused almost imperceptibly before continuing. "Nice area, I drove through there once." As he worked, Margaret noticed a small tattoo on the inside of his wrist, a crude amateur rendering of what appeared to be a dinosaur. Her heart skipped a beat. Noah had loved dinosaurs. His favorite stuffed toy had been a green T-Rex that he'd named Chomper. "That's an interesting tattoo," she commented, trying to keep her voice casual. The artist glanced at his wrist. "Oh, this had it since I was a kid. Don't even remember getting it, to be honest. Foster brother did it with a needle and ink when I was about 12. Foster brother? Margaret couldn't help asking, her heart beginning to race. The young man nodded, still focused on his work. "Yeah, I grew up in the system. Got placed with the Martinez family in Worcester when I was 8 or 9. Stayed with them until I aged out." Margaret felt dizzy suddenly, the marketplace spinning around her. She gripped the edge of the stool to steady herself. 8 or 9. Worcester was less than an hour from Oak Ridge. "Are you all right, ma'am?" The artist looked concerned. "Would you like some water?" "I'm fine," Margaret managed. Please continue." His pencil moved swiftly now, adding final touches to the portrait. When he finally turned it around to show her, Margaret gasped. It was a remarkable likeness, capturing not just her features, but the sadness that had lived behind her eyes for 2 decades. "It's beautiful," Emma said, leaning in to look. "You're very talented, Mr. Martinez," he replied. "Well, that's my adopted name, Nathan Martinez." Margaret stared at him, unable to speak. Nathan, not Noah. But the age was right, the timing, the location. "Do you Margaret began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember anything about your life before the Martinezes?" The young man looked uncomfortable for a moment. "Not really. Doctor said I had some kind of traumatic amnesia. First clear memories are from around age 9 or 10. Emma was looking at her mother strangely now, concerned by her intensity. "Mom!" But Margaret couldn't take her eyes off the young artist. "Your eyes," she said softly. "They're just like my son's." Chapter 3. Nathan Martinez had heard similar comments before, well-meaning older women who saw in him echoes of sons grown distant or lost. He'd learned to smile politely and change the subject, but something about Margaret Wilson's gaze held him captive, as if she were seeing through him to something he himself couldn't access. "I should get going," he said, suddenly uncomfortable. He handed Margaret the portrait, their fingers brushing briefly. "That'll be $20. Emma quickly paid him, while Margaret continued to stare, her hands trembling slightly as she held the portrait. "Do you have a business card?" Emma asked, sensing her mother's unusual reaction and curious herself now. "My husband might want a portrait too." Nathan nodded, reaching into his pocket and producing a simple card with his name and phone number. As he did, a small keychain fell out, a faded plastic dinosaur, worn smooth with age and handling. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Before Nathan could retrieve it, she reached down and picked it up, turning it over in her palm. On the underside, barely visible after years of wear, were the initials NW scratched clumsily into the plastic. "Where did you get this?" Margaret asked, her voice hardly more than a whisper. Nathan looked confused. "I've always had it. It's just a stupid keychain." "NW," Margaret said, pointing to the initials. "Noah Wilson." The marketplace seemed to fall silent around them, though the crowds continued to move and voices still called out from nearby stalls. Nathan took the keychain back, examining the initials as if seeing them for the first time. "My name is Nathan," he said firmly, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "And Nathan Martinez." Emma stepped forward, placing a protective arm around her mother. "Mom, maybe we should go." But Margaret couldn't move. 20 years of hope and grief had crystallized into this single moment. She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out her wallet, extracting a worn photograph, the last school picture taken of Noah before his disappearance. She held it out to Nathan. "Please," she said simply. Nathan hesitated before taking the photo. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The boy in the picture had the same blue eyes, the same crooked smile, but it was just a coincidence. It had to be. People looked alike all the time. "I'm sorry," he said, handing the photo back. "I don't remember anything before the Martinezes." Margaret nodded slowly, taking the photo and tucking it carefully away. "Of course. I'm sorry to have bothered you." As they turned to leave, Margaret paused. "The scar on your eyebrow. How did you get it?" Nathan touched it unconsciously. "I don't know. Always had it, I guess." "Noah fell off his bike when he was 7, Margaret said quietly. "Hit the curb. Needed 5 stitches. A flicker of something, recognition, unease, passed across Nathan's face. He packed up his supplies quickly now, clearly eager to end the conversation. "I really need to go," he said. "I have another spot to set up at this afternoon." Emma had to practically pull Margaret away, guiding her through the crowds toward a quiet bench near the edge of the marketplace. Margaret sat heavily, clutching the portrait to her chest. "Mom," Emma said gently, "I know what you're thinking. But it can't be Noah. It's been 20 years. "You didn't see his eyes, Emma," Margaret replied, "and the dinosaur keychain with NW carved into it. Noah did that himself the week before he disappeared. He was so proud of learning to use his pocket knife." Emma sighed, taking her mother's hand. Even if, and that's a huge if, even if there's some remote possibility, we can't just accost the poor man. We need to be rational about this. Margaret nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead. Detective Miller, she said suddenly. He retired 3 years ago, but he always said if I ever needed anything. That evening, in Emma's guest room, Margaret made the call. Detective James Miller had indeed remembered her instantly, his voice softening with recognition. "Margaret, it's been a while. James, I need your help," she said, explaining the encounter with Nathan Martinez. To his credit, Miller listened without interruption, without the skepticism she'd feared. "It's a long shot," he said when she'd finished. "But I still have contacts at the department. Let me make some calls, see what I can find out about this." Nathan Martinez. 2 days later, Miller called back. Nathan Martinez had indeed been placed with the Martinez family in Worcester in 1998, shortly after Noah's disappearance. He'd been found wandering alone near a bus station, disoriented and unable to recall his name or where he came from. With no matching missing persons reports, an administrative error had filed Noah's case in a different county. The boy had entered the foster system. "It could be coincidence," Miller cautioned, "but I've pulled some strings. If you and this Nathan both agree, we can arrange for a DNA test." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. "After all this time," she whispered, "could it really be possible?" "I don't want you to get your hopes up, Margaret," Miller warned. "But yes, it's possible." The next morning, Emma accompanied Margaret back to Faneuil Hall, but Nathan wasn't there. They tried again the following day with the same result. Finally, gathering her courage, Margaret called the number on his business card. To her surprise, he answered on the second ring. "This is Nathan. Nathan, this is Margaret Wilson. We met the other day when you drew my portrait." A long pause. "I remember." "I'd like to meet with you again," Margaret said carefully. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." Another pause, longer this time. Just when Margaret thought he might hang up, Nathan spoke. "I've been having dreams since I met you. Strange dreams about a house I've never been to, and a girl with red hair." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Emma had had bright red hair as a child. "Please," Margaret said, "just meet with me." "Tomorrow," Nathan finally agreed. "There's a coffee shop on Newbury Street called The Daily Grind, 10 o'clock. That night, Margaret barely slept, alternating between hope so intense it hurt and fear that she was setting herself up for the greatest disappointment of her life. Chapter 4. The Daily Grind was busy with the morning rush when Margaret arrived 15 minutes early. She chose a table by the window, ordered a tea she didn't touch, and waited, her heart pounding with each jingle of the bell above the door. At exactly 10 o'clock, Nathan walked in. He spotted her immediately and made his way over, his expression guarded but not hostile. He carried a worn backpack, which he set carefully on the floor beside his chair. "Thank you for coming," Margaret said, studying his face openly now, allowing herself to see the resemblances she'd noticed before, the shape of his eyes, the way his hair curled slightly at the temples, just like Noah's had. Nathan nodded, ordering a black coffee when the waitress approached. Once she'd gone, he leaned forward. "After you called, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about the dinosaur keychain." "Yes?" Margaret prompted gently when he fell silent. "I've had these fragments, I guess you'd call them. Not full memories, just flashes. A green bedroom with stars on the ceiling, a woman singing while folding laundry." He looked up at Margaret. "A girl with red hair shouting that I'd better not touch her stuff." Margaret's hand trembled as she set down her cup. Noah's room was green. He had those glow-in-the-dark stars. And Emma, my daughter, your sister, she had bright red hair until she was about 16. She was always telling you to stay out of her room. Nathan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "That doesn't prove anything. No, Margaret agreed. It doesn't. She took a deep breath. That's why I'd like to ask if you would consider a DNA test. Nathan sat back, studying her face. You really believe I'm your son? I believe it's possible, Margaret said carefully. And after 20 years of not knowing, of wondering every single day what happened to my little boy, even the possibility means everything to me. Nathan reached for his backpack then, unzipping it and withdrawing a manila folder. I did some research after we met, he said, sliding the folder across the table, about Noah Wilson's disappearance. Margaret opened it with shaking hands. Inside were newspaper clippings, printouts of old news articles, and missing person flyers with Noah's smiling face. Her breath caught at the sight of them. There was nothing suspicious about the Martinez family, Nathan continued. They were good people, strict but kind. They never legally adopted me because I was older and they already had 3 kids of their own, but they treated me well. He paused. But there was always this void, this feeling that my life started in the middle of a story. He reached back into his backpack and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was a baby tooth. My foster mother kept this, he explained, said it fell out a few months after I came to live with them. Apparently I was terrified of the tooth fairy and insisted on keeping it. A small smile flickered across his face. She gave it to me when I aged out of the system. Margaret stared at the tooth, then back at Nathan's face. Noah was afraid of the tooth fairy too, she whispered. He thought someone sneaking into his room at night to take parts of his body was creepy, not magical. Something in Nathan's composed facade cracked then, a flash of vulnerability crossing his features. The detective you mentioned, he said. He called me yesterday. James Miller, Margaret supplied. Nathan nodded. He explained about the DNA test, how it works, how long it takes. He took a deep breath. I agreed to do it. Margaret felt tears welling in her eyes. Thank you, she said simply. Don't thank me yet, Nathan cautioned. I'm not convinced, and even if it turns out to be true, I don't know what that means. I have a life, a history, the Martinezes, or my family, the only one I really remember. I understand, Margaret said, though the words pained her. I'm not asking you to erase your life and become someone else. I need to know. And I thought maybe you might need to know too. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms. There's one more thing, he finally said. Something I've never told anyone, not even my therapist. Margaret waited, hardly daring to breathe. I have this recurring nightmare, Nathan continued. I'm in a bedroom, and someone is lifting me up, carrying me. I'm scared, but I can't scream. Then I'm in a car, and it's dark, and I can't see out the windows. He swallowed hard. For years, I thought it was just a dream. But when I saw you at the marketplace, when you showed me that photo, the nightmare felt different. It felt like a memory, Margaret finished softly. Nathan nodded, looking down at his hands. Yeah. They sat in silence for several minutes, the noise of the cafe washing over them. Finally, Nathan spoke again. If it is true, if I was Noah, what happened to me? Who took me? I don't know, Margaret admitted. The police never found any leads, but Detective Miller is reopening the case based on our meeting. If the DNA confirms it, there will be an investigation. 3 weeks later, Margaret sat in Detective Miller's office, Emma beside her, both women tense with anticipation. Miller entered, closing the door quietly behind him. The results are in, he said without preamble, setting a folder on the desk between them. Margaret couldn't speak, couldn't move. Emma reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. It's a match, Miller said, his professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine emotion. 89.9% probability. Nathan Martinez is Noah Wilson. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Margaret heard Emma's gasp as if from underwater, felt her daughter's arms around her, but couldn't respond. 20 years of grief and hope had culminated in this moment, and she found herself unable to process it. "Does he know?" she finally managed to ask. Miller nodded. "I called him first. He asked for some time to process this before speaking with you." Margaret nodded, understanding completely. This wasn't just her miracle, it was also a seismic disruption to the life Nathan had built, the identity he'd constructed. 2 days later, her phone rang. Nathan's number appeared on the screen. "Hello," she answered, heart pounding. "Hi," came the familiar voice, though it sounded different now, uncertain, vulnerable. "I was wondering if we could meet again." Same place. At the daily grind, Nathan Noah was waiting when she arrived. He stood as she approached, and for the first time, she saw openness in his expression, the guardedness replaced by a tentative sort of wonder. "I don't know what to call you," he admitted as they sat down. "Whatever feels right," Margaret assured him. "I understand this is overwhelming," he nodded, fidgeting with a napkin. "The police have been interviewing me, trying to piece together what happened. I still don't remember much, but they're working with a specialist, someone who helps with recovered memories." "And the Martinez family?" Margaret asked gently. "They're shocked, of course, but supportive." He gave a small smile. "Gloria, my foster mother, she cried when I told her, said she always knew I belonged somewhere, that I'd been loved before I came to them." Margaret felt a rush of gratitude toward this woman who had cared for her son when she couldn't. "I'd like to meet them someday, to thank them." Noah nodded. They'd like that too. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, the dinosaur keychain. "I've been having more fragments come back, little things, the smell of your perfume, a birthday cake with blue frosting." "Your 8th birthday," Margaret said softly. "Just 2 months before you disappeared. You insisted on blue frosting because it was the color of the ocean, and you wanted to be a marine biologist." A smile flickered across his face. "I studied biology in community college, dropped out to pursue art, but I always loved science." Margaret felt tears threatening again, but held them back. "There's so much to learn about each other." "Yeah," Noah agreed. Then, hesitantly, "I'd like that. To learn about you, about Emma, about myself, I guess." They talked for hours, Noah asking questions about his early childhood, Margaret filling in the blanks of his fragmented memories. As afternoon faded into evening, they finally prepared to leave. "I have something for you," Margaret said, reaching into her purse. She pulled out a small, worn stuffed dinosaur, its green fabric faded with age and handling. "This was yours, your favorite. You called him Chomper." Noah took the stuffed toy, turning it over in his hands. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at it. Then, to Margaret's surprise, he brought it close to his face and inhaled deeply. "I remember this smell," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember you tucking me in at night. Chomper had to be under the covers too, but not all the way, because he needed to breathe." Margaret couldn't hold back her tears now. "That's right. You were very concerned about his breathing." Noah looked up at her, and for the first time Margaret saw her son in the man's eyes. Not just the physical resemblance, but something deeper, some essential quality that had endured across 20 years and a stolen identity. "I'm not ready to call you Mom," he said carefully. "Not yet, but I'd like to try to get to know you, to understand who I was, who I am." Margaret nodded, understanding completely. "We have time," she said simply. "After 20 years, we finally have time." "Your deal." Outside the cafe, as they prepared to part ways, Noah hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced Margaret briefly. It was awkward, uncertain, but it was a beginning. As he pulled away, he said softly, "I always felt like I was looking for something. Maybe I was looking for my way home." Margaret watched him walk away, her heart fuller than it had been in 20 years. The mystery of what had happened that June morning 2 decades ago remained unsolved for now, but the greater mystery, the whereabouts of her beloved son, had finally been answered. Noah was alive. Noah was found. And somewhere in the man called Nathan Martinez, Noah Wilson still existed, waiting to be remembered, waiting to come home.